Alright, so hello dinos. Welcome to my Edmonton office. I'm here today to talk to you about Edmund Burke and Atlas Shrugged. So let's begin by quickly going over a little bit about Burke. Alright, so in the Reflections on the Revolution in France, Burke is talking about how basically human nature and how we like continuity, we like tradition. As much as we like, big ideas and principles, we much prefer stability and continuity. He also talks about how it doesn't make sense to be putting into, like in the Declaration of the Rights of Man, it doesn't make sense to be talking about things like universal education or universal healthcare if there's no strategic plan for implementation. He says that it's not logical for the role of government to be dreaming when there's things that actually, like, if they don't have plans for it. Why make promises you can't keep? So much like we saw in Lady Nijo, we are presented with this yin-yang sense of the dream, where Burke himself is immersed in a false sense of reality with his love of the monarchy and with the aristocracy. But he is also accusing the National Assembly of living in the dream because of their assumptions around the rights of man and the Declaration of Man. Burke's assumption is that people are free in their day-to-day lives if a tradition is there to stabilize reality. What he fails to recognize is that the bad conduct of the aristocracy has killed and enslaved the third estate. He's failing to realize the slavery that those people actually live in. He argues that life is about fulfilling traditional practices and moving forward with them. Life is not about idle dreams of recognizing and bringing into fruition rights of man. Life is about tradition, it's about reality, and it's about, slow progress and allowing people who are in a position of power to use that power for the better of all men. The nature of man is intricate. The objects of society are of the greatest possible complexity, and therefore no simple disposition or direction of power can be suitable either to man's nature or to the quality of his affairs. What he's saying here is that law, governance, the running of the ship is not just some willy-nilly thing. You need to have people who are trained in it. You need to have people who are meant intentionally to run and operate government. So these people who are writing, the Declaration of Man, they're putting up these bold ideas of equalité, fraternité. I say it with an Italian accent. I don't know why. But, that they're putting up these ideas of how men should be, but they have no idea how to implement them. The pretend rights of these theorists are all extremes, and in proportion as they are metaphysically true, they are morally and politically false. I think a lot of what Burke is trying to say in this quote is that, these ideas and these grand ideas are very metaphysically true, but if you don't have reality to back it up, then, what's the point? What's the purpose? And I think that, on many sides, I do agree with Burke in that, because it's like, okay, well, keep God out of it, keep God out of politics, keep these grand ideas out of politics. But I think also that's because I'm a very, very internal person, and I come from a position of extreme privilege. So for people who don't have what I have, I imagine that, the idea of equality for all is really great. It's something that they would strive for. And I think that Burke, because he's similarly in a position of strong privilege, he doesn't quite realize the position of the third estate. And, just the fact that, like, the extremely bad behavior of the aristocracy, it fails to provide even, or allow for even the most basic necessities to survive, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like food and shelter and clothing. Like, these things can't be provided for. And the current system, there's no recourse for the day-to-day person to fight that system. And I think that Burke fails to recognize that just like when I feel a strong twinge of conservatism in my heart, it's like, well, I also come from the most privileged position in one of the most privileged positions in society. So it's like, I don't know, it's tough. So yeah. So returning to the idea of the yin and the yang, I think people like myself and Burke, who live in a position of privilege within society, we enjoy the status quo. We enjoy the way things are. And because of that, we don't often fight for change. And we see people who are fighting for changes. It's like, oh, you're radical. I mean, there's so many other ways that you could do this, but it's not open to other people. We haven't opened the game up for other people. Now, I feel like this relates strongly back to Atlas Shrugged and Ayn Rand's whole idea of objectivism in philosophy. The idea of reality, like just deal in reality. And Atlas Shrugged it's one of my favorite books. I think it talks a lot about integrity and about the value of creativity, but I think it also fails to recognize the fact that, it never deals with the issues of criminality. It doesn't deal with, whether or not people are beating people for money and stuff. It doesn't deal with that issue of abuse of power. And how that would be implemented, how you live without, or how you enforce regulations to avoid abuse of power, and that's interesting. So here I'm more of a fan of the book. The movies were terrible, but here's a clip from one of the movies, the first Atlas Shrugged Part 1, to help exemplify my point.
By the way, I don't care what the industry says, Henry. Reardon Metal, it's terrific. I just hope you don't run into any trouble.
What trouble?
Well, you're not very popular, Hank.
I haven't heard any complaints from my customers.
Yeah, that's not what I mean. You know what you should do? You ought to get yourself a good press agent to sell you to the public.
It's my metal I'm selling, not me. Thank you.
But you don't want the public against you. Public opinion, it can mean a lot.
As far as I can tell, it doesn't mean a damn thing one way or another.
The press is against you?
They have time to waste. I don't.
Well, they say you're intractable, you're ruthless, your only goal is to make money.
My only goal is to make money.
Yeah, but you shouldn't say it. Hank, I'm on your side. How's your man in Washington?
Wesley Mouch. He's fine, I suppose.
Good. It's important that your man in Washington is fine.
So much the way that Burke defended the aristocracy and their behavior, and Ayn Rand she's defending producers and capitalism, and this idea of the pursuit of money and selfishness aren't terrible things. And I think that in many ways she's right, but as we see also with Reardon, much the way that Burke thought that, having uneducated masses and these grand ideas of equality, ruling society, we see the same thing with Reardon, where, his friend who's advising him is like, oh, well, have you got the public opinion on your side? Have you got the man in Washington on your side? And is he fighting to have the government on your side? And Reardon is a stalwart character who's just like, I'm just trying to do the best that I can and get things done in the right way. And Ayn Rand very much romanticizes the producer as somebody who is, ingenious and a good business person and just trying to move forward with the day-to-day life. And that the public opinion and that the government are things that get in the way. They've all got their hand in his pocket and they're trying to leech off of his creativity and his ingenuity. And I think that that's very similar to what Burke is trying to say about how, the Declaration of the Rights of Man, these ideas of, broad idealistic ideas for all of society, that was very much Burke's problem with what happened in the French Revolution. And I think that that's what Ayn Rand's trying to say, is that the problem with society is that we don't let producers move forward and just be the best that they can be. Instead, we limit them by reaching into their pockets and trying to hold them back in many ways. And I don't know whether or not that I agree with that entirely. Actually, I know I don't agree with that at all on any level, just because, as I said before, criminality is never dealt with in either of these stories. You know, abuse of power is never dealt with in either of these stories. Both of these characters, Burke and Ayn Rand, romanticize the hell out of the people in positions of power, and they fail to look at the reality. They really fail to look at the reality. And you know, in many ways, that is another aspect of the dream. You know, Ayn Rand presents these people who have like these big moralistic ideas as being dreamers and just not being present at all in the reality of the world. You know, at another point in the book, they're talking, Dagny's confronting her brother James, and her brother James is like, well, why don't we give the contracts to people who need it more, people who need the money more? And Dagny's like, no, we need to get things done. Like we need to give the contract to Reardon because he'll actually get the things done. And in many ways, that seems to be like what Ayn Rand's trying to point out, is that if we just always do things out of sympathy and out of pity for other people, things won't get done. And that in itself, like moralistic idealism, is very much it doesn't actually accomplish anything. And I think Burke is also trying to say that. So I think these two are a very suitable pair for representing what life for representing what freedom and slavery are in modernist society. So yeah, later, dinos.